So the best way to describe it is it's more sustainable. That's like the best way to describe it is it will thrive on its own without man. They have longer roots, so it can handle harsher conditions. And speaking specifically to the heritage turkey red, it can just do it on its own. So it doesn't need all of these added chemicals because the root system is longer and it wasn't hybridized down to make it a higher yield.
Welcome back to another episode of the Breadwinner Podcast. It's your host, Caroline here, and I am here with another amazing conversation about building a sourdough microbakery. I have a guest on the show who is an expert in a very specific conversation that I've been wanting to have for quite a while. So I have Alexandria Fisk on the show, and she bakes with heritage grains. And so she spent some time really understanding them really well on a deeper level than most of us have. And so I thought she'd be the perfect one to come and share some of that learning curve with us and give us some takeaways on how to incorporate heritage grains and what that looks like and how to bake with them. And then I love to talk shop and hear kind of about your bakery experience. So Alexandra, can you introduce yourself and tell us just a little bit about who you are and how you got started in this space?
Yes. Hi. Hello. I'm very excited to be on here with you. So my name is Alexandria. You can call me Alex. I am a sourdough microbaker. I have a cottage license in the state of Minnesota, and I bake sourdough out of my home weekly. My business is Linens and Loaves, and I am a homeschool mom. So I'm home with my two littles. I have a 7-year-old and a 3-year-old, and I get to do the stay-at-home mom, homemaking, homeschooling things while also running a sourdough microbakery. And my bakery specifically specializes in heritage sourdough, heritage grain. I get all of my flour from Sunrise Flour Mill, and I have a sustainable bakery. So everything is wrapped sustainably as well, which was important to me.
I love that. I want to come back to the sustainability too a little bit later on because I feel like that's a conversation that is going to resonate with a lot of listeners too. So I have become more aware of heritage grains since working with Sunrise Flour Mill and just absolutely a super fan now. I love just the nutrition factor and the complexity of flavor, but also I have found that baking with them is different. And it just is a little tricky as I'm kind of becoming more comfortable. So you bake gorgeous bread, but you also do it from a personal conviction. So I would love to know, firstly, like, why did you choose to bake with entirely heritage grains and what has been kind of the journey of starting that?
Absolutely. So I was gluten-free for several years. Myself and our oldest, my daughter, we both have pretty severe gluten intolerances. And over the few years that we were kind of like, okay, well, how can we make this better as far as gluten-free goes? Because you're really not getting like that real food aspect still, typically when you're on a gluten-free diet. And I am lucky enough to live just a couple miles away from, not even, I think it's less than 2 miles that I live from Sunrise Flour Mill. So a lot of people in the community, my friends, my family members, one friend in particular continued to say, I just want you to try it. Just try it. People who have gluten sensitivities can typically handle this flour. So I tried it. Okay, I can handle it. And I then, after a bit, let our daughter try it, and she was able to handle it. So it was this like, is this real life? Can I actually go down this path as far as baking is concerned? Because gluten-free baking and cooking even is a total different ballgame than it is like cooking and baking with real wheat, real flour. The more that I tried, the more I was enjoying it. My body was handling it. Her body was handling it. Our entire menu each week changed in our home. And for the better, everything truly tasted so much more flavorful. Just, it was really a blessing. And after a bit, my mother-in-law, she went to a class actually with Daryl and Marty. And it was a sourdough baking class. And she got the whole kit and really got into her own rhythm of the art of sourdough. And well, I wanted to. So that same year, she purchased a kit from Sunrise Flour Mill for me. And I dove right in. There was definitely a little bit of time where I just let it sit there and look at me like, hey, are you going to do it? Are you going to make real bread? So I did. And I remember pulling that first loaf out, and it was not beautiful by any aesthetic standards. But to me, it was like the most beautiful, incredible thing that I had ever made in my whole life. And we let it cool, and we all enjoyed it. And I was so proud of myself. And I wanted to do more of that. And I wanted to like really hone in on that and learn as much as I possibly could. So I did. I dove feet first and got my starter going and, thriving. And there was a while where we, tucked it away into the fridge, and a couple months later took it back out and dove right back in again. And then that is where I, was baking more often, and people started asking like, oh, do you know anyone that makes sourdough? Because at that point, this would have been like summer of last year. So summer of 2023, like that May, June, July, where a lot of people were just starting to hear about sourdough, and they were curious about it. So they wanted to try it. And I said, well, I can make it. Here, try it. And then it got to be like, well, I would like to buy some. Oh, okay. Well, maybe. So I dug into the cottage law for Minnesota and was able to get my license and sat down really thinking about like a business plan, the business aspect of it. What was that going to look like with me staying home with the children and just our rhythm and routines that we have? And I sold my first loaf right after I got my official first customer. And shortly after that, I was attending, a friend of mine had a beautiful little event in a kind of like a cottage that she has where she sells vintage items. And I baked, I think it was like 40 loaves over 3 days. And it was just bonkers, like totally to me out of my regular home oven. It was crazy, but that was the takeoff of linens and loaves. And I finding Sunrise Flour Mill has been, even just for our home, incredible. When I started thinking about the bakery, I knew that was what I was going to use in the bakery as well, just because there are so many people in the area, especially like in Minnesota, who are familiar with them because they can handle their product versus what you can get at the grocery store. So yeah, that was like the short long of the start of Linens and Loaves.
I love the short long. That's such a wonderful story. And I think it probably resonates with a lot of people. It's very similar. I started baking sourdough also because of a gluten sensitivity.
Mhm.
And now I can bake things like sometimes I don't long ferment my banana bread because I'm using the heritage flour
What?
and I can still eat it. So been a game changer. And it's so neat that you have that relationship with the people behind the company who in all of my interactions with them, they are just genuine, generous, kind people. And I've just been so impressed with them. So I love that. Let's jump in a little bit more specifically to the heritage flour. And can you kind of educate us a little bit? You don't have to be like the full expert with all of the answers, but what makes heritage grains different from just like the conventional flour that we would get at the grocery store?
So the best way to describe it is it's more sustainable. That's like the best way to describe it is it will thrive on its own without man. They have longer roots, so it can handle harsher conditions. And speaking specifically to the heritage turkey red, it can just do it on its own. So it doesn't need all of these added chemicals because the root system is longer and it wasn't hybridized down to make it a higher yield. So say like in the 1950s is when everyone really wanted to start feeding more people, which was needed at that time, absolutely. But it ended up harming wheat as we once knew it. And so the heritage grain it can be utilized more than 1 year also, which is a kind of a neat aspect where traditional wheat nowadays, you don't really get that. They have shorter roots. They need the chemicals, the added chemicals on it and man really grow and get those higher yields. It will feed more people, absolutely, but we're losing the nutritional value of it, which is, I mean, it is sad and it's hard, but in a time where we needed to feed more people, back 50, 60, 70 years ago, it was beneficial. It just wasn't thought about like long-term as far as what it would do. We go over to Europe and people can enjoy the bread there. Well, they're using non-hybridized, wheat. And so it's, not everyone needed to do that. It's a sad part of something that was great at that time.
Mhm. That is so fascinating and so enlightening. Just have so many questions. So for someone who's new to heritage grains, what is kind of the first thing that you would tell them if they want to start baking sourdough? What would help set them up for success?
So if they're just starting, I would say if they like followed specifically like Sunrise's newest recipe, that is a great starting point for beginners utilizing the heritage grain. If they don't have any background to sourdough, they've gotten their starter or their own starter and they now just want to start making sourdough. Utilizing that new beginner's recipe is great. It has a lower hydration than what a lot of recipes call for. And so if you're a seasoned sourdough baker, the biggest tip that I would give you is to just take your same recipe, but lower the hydration and then see how the dough reacts because it doesn't need as much hydration as what you would get from the store. It's more freshly milled flour. And so it's not needed to have that 70 to 75% hydration to get that great texture, that great loaf. You can go down to 67% hydration and get the same similar loaf to like a 72% hydration that you would typically from like the store-bought flour.
Interesting. That is so helpful. So lower the hydration. Is that just because the grains react a little bit differently or
Yeah, you
so
don't
kind of the
need
science?
not necessarily like the science behind it but just from like experience and even like talking with the founders, the grains are, and since it's the way that it's milled a little bit differently, it's not stone milled. And so it is going to act differently, but it doesn't need that same amount of hydration. Even when you're working with a whole wheat loaf, I will still use a higher hydration for that, but it's a lower hydration than like the recipes that are calling for an 85% hydration for a whole wheat loaf. You can drop it down to even like 80%. And if you're going to use like the bread blend or the heritage white, you could certainly just drop it down to 67, 68% hydration and see how your recipe reacts.
Mhm. It's so helpful. So what is kind of one of the most common mistakes that you see or maybe that you had to work through when you started baking with heritage grains? And what would be the solution?
I think knowing that each batch might be different. Each batch of flour, if I go up and I'm getting, say, 250 pounds of flour, it is going to be slightly different the next time based off of, especially like during harvest. Like now we're coming into the newest harvest. It's not full of chemicals. It's not going to be the same every single time. They are doing a great job watching it and making sure that it's time, but it's going to be different per harvest. And so knowing that you're not crazy and it's totally fine if it is a little, is it me? Does it seem a little different? Well, no, you just may have to play around with it. Maybe that harvest needs a little bit less hydration or a little bit more hydration. But once you're comfortable and you already have your rhythm and your routine, you can easily just, I'm going to try it this way. And you just with it until you figure it out. But I think not being afraid if you do get a batch that's, is this like a new harvest? It's part of real wheat. It wasn't always the exact same every single time. And so not being fearful.
That makes me think of going back to the roots of baking and bread preparation too. When they were using real wheat, they were not measuring the temperature every time. They were using their intuition and just adapting and knowing with reps how their dough should feel
Right.
to make their consistent product and adding more water as needed or just kind of adjusting. And so I love that. That probably even will just help bakers hone their intuition or
Mhm.
know kind of how they want their dough to feel and just
Right.
kind of roll with it.
That
Oh,
was going back to the traditional way of truly, baking bread. And if our great grandmothers could do it with a wood stove and a bunch of children running around and just like the wheat and flour and so we can totally do it.
I think about that all the time because I read the Little House on the Prairie series out
Oh
loud to
yeah.
my kids recently, and just their relationship with baking bread, it was just such a natural part of their daily rhythm, but it wasn't complicated and it wasn't they didn't overthink it, and probably, honestly, the bread did not look like the Instagram bread that we
No, probably not. probably not.
A thick slice of bread slathered with butter was their
Okay.
nutrition for the
Wow.
day. That
Yeah.
was their school lunch.
Yeah. So good.
I love that. Just kind of going back to the roots of nourishing food
Yeah.
and nourishing the body and the soul. So you said kind of the best starting point recipe is that most recent basic beginner's recipe from Sunrise. Moving forward, do you have like a favorite recipe that you go back to or even like a non-bread recipe? What are some of your favorites?
I love they have a carrot cake recipe, and it is one of my most favorite. I've adapted it a little bit just to my family specifically, but it is so good. I love a good carrot cake, and
Mhm.
I that is one that I would recommend if people wanna some sort of yummy dessert or, like, a nice cake for a gathering. Carrot cake. Carrot cake all the way, and utilizing, like, they have the pastry flour is it's so great. I will take some of the pastry flour and I'll do maybe 60-40 or 50-50 with either the wheat or the white, just depending on the recipe, just to give it like a little extra flavor. And it's so good. I'll even in the cookies that I make, no matter what the recipe is, I typically will use a blend of either the wheat or the white with the pastry flour. Yeah, I think it's just yummy.
What do you think sets the pastry flour apart?
It's a blend of more flour, and so you get different wheats, and so you get a different texture and you get a different flavor profile, and I really like the flavor profile from that one. I'll even put that one if you make, like, popovers, I'll just put a little extra. That one's more like a 80% with the pastry flour, but it's so good. It just adds a little different texture because it's a coarser flour. It's not coarse, but it is a coarser one in comparison to the whole wheat and the heritage white.
Very, that's so fascinating. I am in the earlier stages of my educational journey, just like self-education about all the different types of flour. And the fact that once you start diving into like heritage wheats or European grains, they have different complex flavor profiles.
Yeah.
And we're not accustomed to that as Americans, just buying, there's like bread flour on the grocery store shelf, and there's all purpose, and there's cake flour, and that's what we're used to.
Right.
So this is a whole new world for a lot of us.
It's really fascinating, and there's different aspects of each variety of wheat, which is just you could go that's a whole 'nother topic that is full of just incredible little snippets of different nutrition value, different flavor profiles. Like you said, it's really incredible as you start
Mhm.
going down that rabbit hole.
Yeah. It's a fun one to start to go down a little bit of just like we were saying, like it's going back to real food. The
Yeah.
Bible talked about bread so much, and that's not this is a tangent, of course, but it was just deeply nourishing, and we have lost
Mhm.
that so much.
Yeah.
But going back to, like, that is a big part of why I said yes to aligning with Sunrise
Yeah.
and bringing them on as a sponsor for the show because I think they do support just the deep nourishment
Mhm.
their customers and their community, and I just know they serve the microbaker community so well. But I feel like it's just opening the eyes to this new conversation that a lot of us just don't even know is something to learn
Mhm.
about yet. I feel like we could just stop there and just keep talking. But I love talking business too. So
Mhm.
your business has some really unique aspects and just everyone is unique and differentiated in certain ways. But the fact that you use the heritage grain and that sustainability is such an intrinsic value for you, I want to hear more about that. So, you have clear values that guide your business. What did you get so clear on those?
I so that it's important also, like, in our home, just the sustainability aspect. We try. There are definitely things that we could still work on, but it's been a journey over the last few years, and I have a hard time with the amount of plastic that is used in food in general. But once this microbakery, like the sourdough aside, just microbakeries started popping up more, it did also add a lot more plastic. And it's the easy thing to do. Absolutely. It would probably save me a little bit of time at this point. I don't think much, but to be able to just throw it in a bag, put the sticker on it, and that's totally fine if that's what works for you. But for myself, I wanted to make sure that whatever I was sending home was able to be completely composted. And so I used brown paper that is compostable. And then I use just twine to tie it up. At this point, I have a couple, my mother-in-law, my mom, they both will come and help wrap if I'm doing a large bake day. And really, it doesn't add on a ton of time. I don't think. I think it would be interesting to side by side with someone that wasn't wrapping each individual loaf. But that the sustainability was really important because I didn't want to be sending home something real in something that was in my eyes almost tainted. And so really figuring out, initially I was just buying like small rolls of it. How could I grow with the sustainability aspect still a top priority? And so finding ways to do that wasn't easy, but I did end up getting where I get really large rolls of this brown paper that can be recycled. And I have one of those big paper cutters. You like roll out the paper and then you slice it. So it works that way. I don't have to buy bags. I buy paper bags like for events. But as far as individual items for the bakery, everything goes either into a brown, almost like the lunch bags, the brown lunch bags, similar to that, just different sizes. And the loaves get wrapped with the brown paper and then tied with twine. And I print all of my labels, and the labels aren't stickers. They're just paper that like cardstock that I hole punch, and we have a big paper cutter that we slice them all. And then I just add the tag that has all the information on the front and the back to the twine and tie that up with it. So that can just be tossed as well. And so there was a lot of people initially thought like the linens aspect, I was going to do 30% linens and 70% loaves. When I started, it was going to be like table linens, bread bags, things like that. The loaves took over. And so then they're like, oh, well, is it just because you wear linen? I said, oh, that works. That is a very nice little ironic thing. But once I realized I wouldn't be able to time-wise make it so that every person, like for weekly pickups, was getting like a reusable bread bag that they could then just bring back and swap out. This was really the next best thing, is this recyclable paper. And there are different weights to the paper. And so finding the one that worked well enough as far as being able to wrap it very quickly, but have it not poke through or tear easily. I didn't want it to be too dainty. It still needed to be semi heavy duty. It was all just a learning process, and one that I consistently tried to figure out how I could do better as I was growing. That grew with me instead of where I got to a point of, oh, I'm really doing a lot. It would be a lot easier if I just put it in a bag. It was just a work, and I kept at it and figured out how to easily make it work as I grew. So I have a prep day where I will prep all of the paper. I'll cut all of the twine and all of the paper and the tags and just have those ready and set aside, similar to just getting the bags ready with the labels, exactly like that. And that's fine because the kids can be there with me. They can help. One can hole punch, one can cut the twine, and they may not all be like super similar as far as like where the holes are, but it's perfect and it works for us.
Yeah, I love that. That is so incredible. So I have like 3 follow-up questions,
Okay.
and hopefully I can remember them all. The first one is, for people who feel like they want to package the same way that you do, so they can skip the learning curve, are you open to sharing the weight of the paper that you landed on and maybe where you source it?
I want to say the weight is 50. I will double check though. Is there a way that we can put
Yeah,
that?
if you just send it back to me, I can put it in the show notes.
Yep. So I actually purchased it from a company called Uline. They sell like the big giant rolls of paper, and you can find some that are like recycle. And I want to say that the weight is 50. I feel like at one point I was using 60, and that was too heavy. It didn't fold over as easily. But yeah, I will absolutely send you exactly what I'm using. And that's even Uline, I believe, is where I purchased the paper cutter as well. And that just sits in my front porch. I always have a roll on it, and I can just like where it is. It doesn't ever move because it's so heavy. It just looks there. But my pickup table is right there. So I just cut them, put it right on the pickup table. And then I take that when it's ready to be wrapped, wrap everything, and then everything goes back out onto the pickup table. But
That's perfect. I love using this show to help people skip part of the learning curve.
yes.
So you can say, I tried this, it didn't work, do this instead.
Yeah.
And just
And the
kind of serve
heavier
it away.
paper was nice, but it was too difficult to continue to work with, too bulky. It's so funny that you can think that bulk paper would be bulky, but it definitely is when you're using so much of it over and over. And so, yeah, yeah, it is nice to be able to share that knowledge.
Yeah, that's amazing. Will be so helpful, and I'll put that in the show notes.
Yeah.
So let's see. The next question that I had as you were talking was, I was having this conversation with a friend recently relating to sustainability, and everyone has to make their own choices, what aligns for them and what makes sense, and what kind of aligns with your values is not going to look like everyone else's. So this is a slight tangent again. The heart behind the show is never to promote comparison. So if you're listening to this and your values are a little different, this is not to say you're not doing it right if you're not making the same choices as Alex. Just putting that out there. But so part of our conversation with another friend about relating to sustainability was relating to like, how do you make those choices? How do you choose what makes sense? But then also, sometimes when you are making choices that align with sustainability, there's a point where there's like a ceiling almost where you have to balance profitability and efficiency. And so what has that looked like for you? Have you had to rein in like the number of products that you offer? Or obviously you sourced a larger product and you made your cutting smoother. Is that a decision that you've had to make? And what has that looked like?
So I did a lot of work on the business plan prior to launching. And then I revisited that plan when I grew because I launched in August of 2024. By November, I purchased a bread oven. And so I revisited the business plan at that point. But I initially started selling my loaves at a higher cost because of the sustainability aspect of it. Not only was it sustainable, but I was also using heritage grains. And so just right off the bat, my prices were higher because I had to take that into consideration. And so when I revisited again a few months later, being able to sit down and look at numbers and realize, okay, this is still, I don't need to raise my prices. I'm still at that point that I want to be at, but being able to find ways to then make it easier and quicker without having to make it cost more for my customers. That was still, and that's still something that I revisit. Okay, is there a way that I could do anything, differently? I think that coming back to your business plan, and if you don't have a business plan, make one. That is the best thing that you can have to like actually sit down and go back to and be like, okay, that's right. This is what I'm doing. This is why I'm doing it. This is how much I'm trying to make or bring in. It's important. And so I was able to maintain that same cost throughout after I really kicked off because it was part of the plan. I think I might be the highest priced baker in this area. And there are definitely ones that are popping up. But I have a friend who she just lives a couple towns over and she is also a sourdough baker. And I'm like, I think you should raise your price because she started using Sunrise flour mill. And once she sat down, she's like, okay, yeah, you're right. Okay, thanks. But there is this fear surrounding just prices in general. And I think that if that's something that you feel like you need to do in order to like bring in what you want, do it confidently and whatever happens is going to be. Just make sure that you are confident in your decision. That's important. People recognize that. If they see, there's a little bit of uncertainty there, maybe we'll tell her like, I don't know, I'd like to pay $2 less. You just have to be confident in your decision, whatever that may be for your business.
Yeah. That is such good advice. And it prompts kind of another follow-up question. So Sunrise Flour Mill flour is priced higher than, like, for example, the Costco organic flour that a lot of us use. And so that does kind of require that you price higher. And so how do you show up or how do you message to communicate the value of what you're offering? And your customers can then make the choice whether they're going to pay for your premium heritage product or go to a different baker who maybe aligns differently. Maybe they don't want to pay, and that's okay. It's up to the customer. But how do you communicate in a way that you are reaching the customers want your premium product and are willing to pay so that you can offer it and offer that you can purchase the Sunrise Flour Mill to offer it? Does that make sense?
I think so. You tell me if I'm not answering your question. But I really, the aspect of it being a heritage, like a real wheat, right? There is no added chemicals. There is a want for that, a desire for that. And those are aspects of it that I touch on often. You'll see it often in my social media. If I'm at an event, it's written on a big form. I have, oh, here, this is about the wheat specifically that I'm using. And then I dive into the gluten intolerance aspect of it because that is so prevalent. And even though like sourdough is better for our gut, when you pair sourdough with a heritage wheat, it's just like that next level. And so talking about that and letting people know, no, I'm not using like a bleached flour from the grocery store, which again, that will feed a lot of people. You can make a lot of product for a smaller, cost and feed a lot of people. And so there's not necessarily anything like bad about that if that's what you're trying to do. But knowing that you can charge what it's worth, and there are people that will recognize that value. And the more you talk about it, the more people, if they don't already recognize it, they're going to be curious about it. And they're going to want to know, okay, well, why is this real and this is not? Can you explain a little bit more? And that opens the door for some really great conversation.
I love that. I see you do a really good job of that on Instagram, of sharing that conversation. Are there other ways that you market too? Or is that kind of one of your primary ways of educating your customers?
That is the primary way. I used to send out like email, but that got to be more like ordering emails. And eventually I would love to have a blog, be like one of those people that had a blog, just because there's so much to talk about and social media only gives us so much room. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So, but no, social media is my biggest platform. I do attend some events like at specific locations. And so people recognize, oh, hi, I wanted to talk to you about A, B, and C. And so I like to make sure that I have room for those conversations. If I can bring someone to help at an event, just so that I can talk a little bit more, I definitely do that. My mom is so wonderful and she will come with me and just be the bread lady with me because it does. Any space that you can to create room to have those deeper conversations is wonderful. Whether it's food, bakery, wheats, what have you. It's something that isn't very prevalent anymore. It's like the community aspect of just day to day comes and goes. And so if you can hold on to it, it's important.
Right. Yeah. That's wonderful. Do you use like Facebook groups to find new customers, or do they find you through word of mouth and Instagram, or how do you reach new people?
It's mostly word of mouth. I didn't have a Facebook page for a long time, but a friend of mine owns a shop just north of me and I will do pop-ups there. And she's like, I need you to get a Facebook so then you can be a co-host. And I said, oh, okay. It's not my favorite thing. If I could not use it, I would. But I do get some customers from there every once in a while. If I notice in our community groups that people are looking for sourdough, I'll post about it. But for the most part, it is word of mouth. And I like to donate loaves to local businesses, which then also is like word of mouth, right? Like it's something that I am able to do in the bakery. Like with what I bring in, I can then donate if I want to the sheriff's department or what have you. And it's a blessing for them, but it also is word of mouth. And so it's like this wonderful, beautiful thing that can also be beneficial in like the back end of it. But yeah, for the most part, social media, Instagram is my main thing. I'll post a few things here and there on Facebook, but for the most part, it's Instagram. And then I will do farmers markets. People will find me through there, but then they just go on to my social medias anyway. So
it brings me perfectly into the next question that I had, which kind of goes back to packaging a little bit. Yeah. So when you are packaging your bread in paper, and so people can't see the bread inside, when you're showing up at pop-ups or at markets, how do you show them what they're getting? Do you have a display loaf or what does that look like?
I do. Yep. I always bring a display loaf and so I'll have my large loaf and then I will have a mini loaf. Sometimes I only do one inclusion loaf and that's a double chocolate espresso. So if I'm bringing that one, I will bring one of those for display as well. So anything that I'm bringing will be displayed on my table. My large loaf goes into, have you seen those baskets that have like the terracotta plate on the bottom of them? Mm-hmm. And so you can like warm up the bread. It's like a bread warming basket, I think is actually what it is. So I bought one of those and I love it very much, but I will bring that with me and I'll just have a table linen tucked around it. And so people can see this is the large loaf. And then I have a larger cake stand that I purchased probably like from Target. And I can fit my 2 mini loaves if I'm bringing 2 mini loaves in there, as well as 6 cookies, because I sell my cookies in bags of 6. And so everyone can see, okay, this is the size of the cookie. This is what the mini loaf looks like. This is what the large loaf looks like. Because people do want to see what they're buying, but they don't have to see this exact loaf that they're buying. You know what I mean? Like they can just, oh, you get an idea. Most of them look very similar to this. They may be like slight variations, but for the most part, this is what you're going to get. People do appreciate that. There are times where I've forgotten a loaf, so a mini loaf or my large loaf, and I'm like, no, I mean, I could open one, but I only brought so many. So, and people don't have a hard time with that, not being able to see it. For the most part, people will walk up and say, oh, I love your packaging. And are they even looking at the loaves that I have displayed? I don't know, but it is nice just for my thought that they at least get an idea. In the times that I have forgotten, I just directed them onto my social media if they want to see anything. But really, I think it's only been maybe a few times that I've forgotten and people don't really care. It's more like my benefit that I have it.
Yeah, that's so helpful because that's been a question that I've had other people bring up to me when we're talking about packaging, and a kind of a concern that they think it might be a barrier for people who are purchasing if they can't see it. And so it's so helpful and kind of reassuring to hear from you that it doesn't adversely affect customer experience at all.
Nope. If anything, it's more of a, oh, thank you. This is really great. I appreciate this packaging. It's so beautiful. And that I hear that way more. I don't know that I've ever had someone say, well, I wish I could see it.
Well, and they probably see just the full picture of you have a gorgeous product made with premium organic flour. You are clearly just sustainability is baked into your business. No pun intended.
I love it.
It came into my brain. I was like, I'm saying it. I just got to go with it. There, you have a new tagline. You're just seeing, and it all contributes to this beautiful picture of an incredibly mindful, intentional business. And so it just makes sense that your bread would be wrapped that way.
Yeah.
I love that. I just feel like I have so much to learn from you, and I am loving this conversation. One of the final questions I have for you as we kind of wind down is I love to give my guests a chance to kind of share something that maybe wouldn't normally or wouldn't get to talk about on social media. Maybe it's too long or just doesn't fit into your content pillars, whether it's an experience or a challenge or a story. Or is there anything that comes to mind that you would love to share, whether it's advice for the audience or it's anything that jumps to mind?
Yeah, I like that. Thank you. I think that something that I don't talk about often is being a homeschool mom while running the business. Not only that, but my husband also works from home. So we are all home all the time together, and finding our rhythm is something that we come back to often because it may work for a very short season and we have to reassess because something has changed. But being like a stay-at-home mom and while also homeschooling and running the business isn't easy. A lot of people will say, oh, you just have it down. You just know what you're doing. No, I don't. I am not even close to knowing what I'm doing. And it is something that I am constantly learning to adjust and reevaluate because it isn't easy. It's something that is super important to me. So I want to succeed at that. And I want to make sure that my children are getting everything that they need and our home is getting everything that it needs. But it isn't easy. And maybe I do need to talk about that a little more, actually, just because I think a lot of people think that it's just this very like rainbows and butterflies, right? And it's not. The bakery aspect is there's a lot that has to be done and it's a lot of work. And being a mom is hard and it takes a lot of work, and being a wife is hard and that takes a lot of work. And finding that balance, but also like knowing you have to come back to it and the weights are going to shift and you just have to readjust. Keep on.
I love that that's the direction you went with that question, because I think it's a conversation that really does need to be had. And there are so many women, moms who are homeschooling and running a microbakery. And just the honesty about the challenge, that is so important. There are certain rhythms. Obviously, it's always evolving and changing as your children grow and your family needs change. But are there certain things that you come back to or that you found do serve your family really well?
Reading how we're all feeling. Like I will have our schedule. For example, right now, this is the perfect time. I have our schedules like just our normal rhythm, right? And then I will add in like our nature walk. And my daughter has like a nature science school that she attends a class on Thursday. So those are like our constants, right? it can change at any moment. Like, we're on week 8 of this horrible cough. And so our whole rhythm and routine has been like, we are just surviving. We are just strictly surviving. And, what school, like our school looks like is different than I had planned. But I just had to okay, adjust, read how we're all feeling, and know that we're going to come out of it and it's going to be fine. But it's not finding that rhythm, yes, but knowing that it can change and you just have to adapt it. I like having the few constants, even though we haven't had those constants in the last few weeks. We'll come back to it and I'll know, okay, on Mondays it's this day. Like, we have Grandma Day on Monday. And then Tuesdays, every other Tuesday is Library Day. Wednesday is prep day for mom. So we're home and we're doing a lot of poetry tea time. And what things can I bring in that will work with what we have to do? And also, what do we want to get done for that?
Yeah, I love that. So just kind of gauging just the general needs for the family, having your consistent values that you return to, but knowing that you can ebb and flow and be willing and ready to adapt. I think that's so important. It can be easy to idealize the routine. And then the mom guilt comes in too sometimes of well, our routine is totally thrown off.
Yeah.
And what have I done wrong? Or maybe you feel like the business is taking too much time and just so much grace is required.
It is. Like, last week, my husband happened to be out of town all week. The kids were not feeling great still. And so I was like, I'm not going to do bread this week. And it's okay. Like, reminding yourself, it is okay. It is not like this catastrophic thing. And it's not going to affect your business in a way that is going to be so detrimental if you take a week off. And not only I took last week off, but next week we got invited to a friend's cabin a few hours north of us. And I said, yeah. And so I just sent out a note. I'm not going to have bread also this next week. And that's okay. I have a huge pickup for this week, but that's okay. I will work it into our routine, but knowing you can step back from whichever thing that you need to do. Maybe as far as homeschooling goes, you have so many events planned and field trips, and it's just getting to be too much for you and the kids are tired, and you can pull away from some of those and just be whole. Or if you're finding you're doing too many events in the bakery, you can pull away from those and it's okay. And taking a couple weeks off. December was my busiest month last year. Am I regretting not making it my busiest month this year? Not even the slightest. In fact, I'm enjoying the slow of it more so than the fast pace that I had a year ago this time.
That is such a beautiful conversation. I think there's so much power in knowing what we can say no to. And it's one of the privileges and the beauties of owning a home-based business like this is that we do have that freedom to scale back and to say no to things. And that our customers generally really will be supportive of that. If we just share honestly, a lot of times they will say, you go girl, you take that time for your family and soak that up, and they will be there when we're ready to come back. And for most of us, we're going to find that January is going to be a really slow month too. Our customers will be there, but they are not going to be knocking at our door and saying why aren't you selling 100 loaves of bread this week? We can just release some of that pressure from ourselves too.
Yes, because you do. It's this pressure is such, it's almost like this, we're just wired to have it. We're just that is just something that we're accustomed to and we're used to. And so once we start feeling that, we just build on it as well. And so the hard part is saying, wait, no, I don't want to feel like this. I need to step back and just take a break. I know you talked about the holiday burnout. That is something that you can experience at any time of the year, And so if you are starting to feel that, you just take a week. Just one and see how you feel. And if you need another one, that's okay. It is not going to be detrimental to your business.
Yeah, that's so true. So many of us started this business because it is a way to be present with our family. And so it is just sort of this of checking in, like you said, checking in with the needs of the family and checking in with how everyone's feeling. And if you need a week where you just pull back and you love on your family really intentionally and just kind of reset, you have the freedom to do that because you get to choose and you get to make your own rules in your business. That is so good. I think so many of our listeners will find so much freedom and encouragement in that conversation. And I thank you for making the space to opening that conversation.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, I really think we could just keep talking for ages, but I want to respect your time. So we'll kind of wrap up a little bit here. If people want to reach out to you, maybe have more of a conversation about what sustainability looks like
Mm.
in your business and how maybe they could incorporate into theirs, or have maybe more questions about baking with Sunrise Heritage Grains,
Yeah.
can they reach out to you, and where can they find you?
Absolutely. They can reach out anytime. I am on social media. My Instagram is linens and loaves, all one word. And also you can email me. I will see my emails more so than I will messages come through on social media quicker at least. But my email is linensandloaves@gmail.com. Like I said, I'll see the email come through first, but either Facebook or Instagram, you could certainly reach out there. And I'm more than happy to talk about sustainability, heritage grains, baking in general, all of the things.
Wow. Well, thank you so much for taking time out of your day. This has just been delightful, and I have loved getting to know you a little bit better. And for those of you who are not yet following Alexandria, make sure you do that because her Instagram is just stunningly gorgeous. Keep in mind that anytime we're seeing Instagram, we are not seeing the whole picture. And so don't compare yourself, but just know that she is pouring so much joy and love into her business and into her family. And I'm so glad that this community has connected us.
Yeah.
So,
Thank you
as
so much.
always,
Hey.
yeah, as always, listeners, I would love if you screenshot the show, tag me, I'm Caroline Bauer _ sourdough, and tag Alex Linens and Loaves, and make sure you're following her and just get all of that beautiful heritage grain goodness in your feed. I will be back very soon with another episode, but until then, happy baking.